A woman stands outside a cafe window covered head to toe in mud, waving desperately at the man waiting inside for their blind date. Her dress is ruined. Her hair hangs in muddy strands. Teenagers are laughing at her from across the street. Most men would walk away. Most would make an excuse and disappear. But when 34-year-old single father Mike Harrison sees her standing there completely humiliated and unable to come inside, what he does next doesn't just surprise her, it changes everything. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world are you tuning in from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. Mike Harrison checked his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. 7:10 p.m. The Bluebird Cafe hummed with quiet conversation around him, the smell of fresh bread and rosemary filling the air, but all he could focus on was the knot tightening in his chest. His fingers drummed against the menu he'd read 4 times already, without absorbing a single word. The window table suddenly felt too exposed, like everyone in the restaurant could see exactly what he was, a man who hadn't been on a date in 3 years, sitting alone wondering if he'd been stood up. At 36, Mike had the kind of presence that drew second glances. Tall and broad-shouldered from years of construction work before he'd become an architect, he had kind hazel eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, and silver was just beginning to thread through his dark hair at the temples. Tonight, those eyes held a mixture of hope and terror that made him look younger than his years. He glanced at the door again, still empty. Maybe this was a sign. Maybe he wasn't ready. Maybe his sister Rebecca had been wrong to push him into this blind date setup. Maybe 3 years wasn't enough time to move forward after losing Jennifer. The memories hit him like they always did, sudden and sharp. Jennifer's laugh echoing through their craftsman-style home in Portland's Irvington neighborhood. Her hand in his as they walked through Laurelhurst Park on Sunday mornings. The way she'd sing off-key while making pancakes for their daughter Emma, not caring who heard her, because joy was meant to be shared, not hidden. Then came the darker memory. The phone call at work. The rush to the hospital. The doctors explaining that the aneurysm had been massive, that there was nothing they could have done. Jennifer vibrant and alive at breakfast, gone by dinner, leaving behind a 4-year-old who asked every night when Mommy was coming home. Mike ran his hand through his hair, a nervous habit he'd developed since becoming a single father. Emma was 7 now, brilliant and precocious, and the absolute center of his world. She'd been the one to encourage this date, actually. Last week she'd looked up from her art project and announced, "Daddy, you need a girlfriend." "I do," he'd asked, amused by her serious expression. "Aunt Rebecca says so. She says you're getting weird from only talking to grown-ups at work and me. And I'm just a kid, so I don't count for grown-up conversation. Out of the mouths of babes." Rebecca had been less subtle in her matchmaking attempts, practically ambushing him with photos and stories about her colleague Sarah, until he'd finally agreed to meet her. "She's perfect for you," Rebecca had insisted. "She works with kids, she's kind, she's been through some stuff, so she'll understand about Jennifer. Just meet her Mike. 1 coffee. What's the worst that could happen?" Famous last words. Mike checked his phone again. No messages. He'd gotten Sarah's number from Rebecca, but hadn't wanted to seem pushy by texting first. Now he wished he had. At least then he'd know if she was running late or if she'd changed her mind entirely. The rational part of his brain knew that dating again was healthy. Emma needed to see that love was possible after loss, that hearts could heal without forgetting. But the part of him that still woke up reaching for Jennifer's side of the bed wasn't sure he was ready to open himself up to that kind of vulnerability again. Meanwhile, 6 blocks away, Sarah Mitchell was having her own crisis of confidence as she hurried through the October drizzle that made Portland famous. At 29, she was petite and energetic, with auburn hair that caught the light and green eyes that sparkled when she laughed. Tonight, those eyes were clouded with anxiety as she navigated the crowded sidewalks in heels she rarely wore. Sarah had grown up in the foster care system, bouncing between families who saw her as a temporary responsibility rather than a person worth knowing. It had taught her to be self-sufficient, to expect disappointment, and to build walls around her heart that few people ever managed to scale. Moving to Portland 2 years ago for her job at the Central Library had been a fresh start, a chance to create the life she'd always dreamed of. Working with children came naturally to her. As the head of youth services, she ran reading programs that had become legendary among Portland families. Kids who hated books found themselves captivated by her storytelling. Shy children discovered their voices in her safe spaces. Struggling readers learned that stories could be adventures, not assignments. But dating was a minefield of potential rejection and disappointment that Sarah had mostly avoided since her last relationship had ended badly 8 months ago. David had seemed perfect at first, charming and successful, until she'd realized he saw her traumatic childhood as something to fix rather than simply accept. When she'd ended things, he'd told her she'd never find someone willing to deal with her baggage. The comment had stung because Sarah feared it might be true. Who wanted to love someone who'd never learned how to be loved properly? Who came with trust issues and abandonment fears and no family to speak of at holidays. But Rebecca Harrison had been persistent. "My brother is kind," she'd said during one of their weekly coffee dates. "He's been through loss, so he understands that people come with histories. And he's raising a little girl who could use a positive female influence." Sarah had finally agreed to the blind date, more to stop Rebecca's matchmaking than from any real expectation of success. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a burgundy dress that flattered her figure without being too revealing, comfortable heels, her grandmother's vintage earrings for luck. She'd even splurged on a professional blowout, wanting to look her absolute best. Now, as she turned onto the street that housed the Blue Bird Cafe, she could see the warm glow of the restaurant's windows up ahead. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she pictured the man waiting inside. Rebecca had shown her photos. Mike was undeniably handsome, in a rugged, reliable way that made her stomach flutter. But more than that, there was something in his eyes in those pictures, a depth that spoke of someone who'd loved deeply and lost greatly. Sarah slowed her pace, suddenly terrified. What if she wasn't what he expected? What if the conversation died after 10 minutes? What if he took one look at her and found her lacking? She was so lost in her worried thoughts that she didn't notice the construction barrier that had been poorly placed around a massive puddle where the sidewalk had been torn up for repairs. The autumn rain had turned the excavated area into a muddy pit, and in the dim street lighting it was nearly invisible. One moment Sarah was walking confidently toward what might be her future, and the next she was airborne, her heel catching on the uneven pavement. She landed face first in the mud with a splash that sent dirty water flying, soaking her dress and coating her hair in grime. For a moment she lay there, stunned, the breath knocked out of her. Then the humiliation hit. From across the street she could hear teenagers laughing, could see the glow of phone cameras recording her disaster. She pushed herself up, wincing as pain shot through her twisted ankle, and took stock of the damage. Her dress was ruined, covered in mud from knees to neckline. Her carefully styled hair hung in wet, dirty strands around her face. Her phone, which had flown out of her purse during the fall, was completely submerged in the puddle, its screen black and lifeless. Sarah's first instinct was to run, to disappear into the night and never show her face in this neighborhood again. But as she looked up, she could see the Blue Bird Cafe 50 feet away, its windows glowing warmly in the darkness. Somewhere inside, Mike Harrison was waiting for her. She couldn't call to explain what had happened. She couldn't text to reschedule. She could either walk away and ghost him completely, or she could face the most humiliating moment of her life with whatever dignity she could muster. Sarah limped toward the cafe, her ankle throbbing with each step, and pressed her face against the window. Movement outside the glass caught Mike's eye. A young woman stood just beyond the cafe entrance, visible through the large windows that faced the street. She wasn't coming in. She was just standing there, and she was completely covered in mud from her knees down, with splatters across what looked like it had once been a burgundy dress. Her auburn hair hung in damp, muddy strands around her face, and her green eyes were wide with mortification. Their eyes met through the glass. She started waving at him, not a casual wave, but a desperate, mortified, please don't leave kind of wave. Her other hand pressed against her chest, and even from inside, Mike could see her mouth the words, "I'm so sorry." For a moment he just stared. Then understanding dawned. This mud-covered disaster of a woman had to be Sarah Mitchell, his blind date. Every instinct told him something was wrong. Not dangerous, but wrong. This woman looked like she'd been through something traumatic, and she was trying to communicate with him from outside the restaurant, because she clearly couldn't come inside looking like that. Mike didn't hesitate. He stood immediately and walked toward the door, ignoring the curious glances from other diners. The knot in his chest that had been anxiety transformed into something else entirely, concern for this stranger who was clearly having the worst night of her life. The moment he stepped into the cool evening air, he could see the full extent of what had happened to her. Her burgundy dress was soaked and stained with mud. Her hands were scraped, probably from trying to break her fall. She was favoring her left ankle, and her entire body was trembling, whether from cold or embarrassment or both. "Sarah," he asked gently. Her eyes filled with tears instantly. "I'm so sorry. I was literally right there." She pointed to a spot about 50 feet from the cafe with a shaking hand. "I could see the entrance. I was walking toward it, and I was so nervous about this date that I wasn't watching where I was going." She took a shaky breath, and Mike noticed how she was trying to hide her scraped palms behind her back. There was this huge puddle from the rain earlier, mixed with mud from the construction site, and I just completely wiped out. Full faceplant like cartoon-level fall. Mike's concern deepened. He could see her scraped palms now, the way she was trying to hide them. "A bunch of teenagers saw the whole thing," Sarah said, her voice cracking. She gestured across the street where a group of kids were still filming on their phones, some already posting to social media. They were laughing, taking videos. "I wanted to disappear into the ground." She held up her phone, which was covered in mud and clearly beyond saving. "And my phone is completely dead. I couldn't call Rebecca to tell you what happened. I couldn't text you. I couldn't just leave you sitting there wondering where I was." Her voice grew smaller with each word. "But I also couldn't walk into that nice restaurant looking like this." She gestured at herself, and Mike could see the humiliation written across every inch of her face. Despite being covered in mud, despite her obvious distress, there was something about her that drew him in. Maybe it was the courage it had taken to show up here instead of simply running away. Maybe it was the consideration she'd shown for his feelings, even in her own moment of crisis. "I understand if you want to cancel," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is probably the worst first impression in dating history. I'm a disaster. You can just go and I'll tell Rebecca it was mutual or something." "Stop," Mike said gently. Sarah looked up at him, confused. He studied her for a long moment. This woman who'd had the courage to show up despite her complete humiliation, who'd stood outside waving rather than simply running away and ghosting him, who was standing here covered in mud, ankle clearly hurting, and still trying to be considerate of his feelings. In that moment, Mike thought about Jennifer. About the countless times she'd told him that kindness was a choice, and that the measure of a person wasn't how they acted when things were easy, but how they responded when life got messy. He thought about Emma and what he wanted to teach her about showing up for people who were struggling. Without hesitation, he stepped forward and gently took Sarah's muddy hand. "Come with me," he said. What Sarah stared at their joined hands, shocked that he was touching her despite the mess. "Where?" "There's a boutique 2 blocks down Stella's place. My sister shops there all the time. They have a full powder room in the back. Let's get you cleaned up." Sarah stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. "You want to continue the date?" After seeing this, she gestured at her mud-covered self, with her free hand wincing as the movement pulled at her scraped palms. Mike smiled genuinely. Smiled for the first time that evening. The expression transformed his entire face, softening the worried lines around his eyes and making him look younger. "Accidents happen, Sarah. Besides, if you had the courage to show up like this instead of standing me up, the least I can do is help you get cleaned up. Come on." As they walked toward the boutique, Sarah limping slightly, and Mike carefully matching her pace, she couldn't stop staring at their joined hands. He wasn't pulling away from the mud, wasn't making faces or complaining about his shirt getting dirty where she'd accidentally brushed against him. "I can't believe you're not running away," Sarah said finally, her voice still shaky with emotion. "Why would I run away? Because I'm a mess. Literally and figuratively." Mike glanced at her, and something in his expression made her catch her breath. There was understanding there, the kind that came from personal experience with falling apart. "Everyone's a mess sometimes, Sarah. At least you're honest about it." The words hit her unexpectedly hard. In her experience, most people ran when things got complicated. Her foster families had returned her to the program when her behavior became challenging. Her ex-boyfriend had bailed the moment her trust issues became inconvenient. But here was this stranger, this man she'd never met before tonight, choosing to help instead of flee. "I don't understand," she said softly. "You don't even know me." Mike was quiet for a moment as they navigated around a group of college students heading to dinner. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "My daughter Emma is 7. Last month she fell off her bike in front of our house and skinned her knees pretty badly. She was crying, bleeding, covered in dirt, just devastated." "Do you know what I did?" Sarah shook her head, hanging on every word. "I scooped her up and took her inside to clean her wounds and put on bandages. I didn't think about how messy she was or how she'd gotten dirty. I just saw someone who needed help." He squeezed her hand gently. "Sometimes that's all it takes. Just seeing someone who needs help and deciding to show up." The simplicity of it, the basic human decency, made Sarah's throat tight with emotion. When was the last time someone had simply shown up for her without expecting anything in return? They reached Stella's boutique, and the older woman behind the counter took one look at Sarah and immediately ushered them inside without question. Stella Martinez was in her 60s, with kind eyes behind stylish glasses and silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon. She'd run the boutique for over 20 years and had seen all manner of fashion emergencies. "Oh, honey, what happened to you?" Stella asked, her voice full of genuine concern rather than judgment. Mike explained quickly, while Sarah stood there dripping mud on the polished floors, still unable to fully process that this was actually happening. That instead of making excuses and disappearing, this man was actively helping her salvage what had started as the most humiliating night of her life. "The bathroom's in the back," Stella said, pointing toward a hallway lined with mirrors. "Take your time, dear. I'll get you some towels and toiletries." "I can't afford," Sarah started, suddenly remembering that boutique prices were well beyond her librarian's budget. "Don't worry about it," Mike interrupted gently. He turned to Stella. "Can we find her something to wear? Something simple is fine." "Mike, you can't buy me clothes," Sarah protested, overwhelmed by the kindness of strangers. "You don't even know me." "Consider it an investment," he said, with that same gentle smile that was quickly becoming familiar in what I hope will be a great evening. As Stella led her toward the back of the store, Sarah looked over her shoulder at Mike one more time. He'd settled into a comfortable chair near the front, completely at ease, despite the unusual circumstances. He caught her looking and gave her an encouraging nod, that somehow made everything feel like it might actually be okay. 20 minutes later, Sarah stood in the boutique's spacious bathroom, staring at herself in the mirror. The mud was gone, washed away with warm water and expensive soap that smelled like lavender and honey. Her hair was clean and styled in a simple bun that Stella had shown her how to create with bobby pins from the store's emergency kit. She was wearing a new dress, this one, a deep forest green that complemented her eyes and somehow fit even better than the ruined burgundy one. She took a shaky breath, pressing her palms against the cool marble countertop. Her reflection looked back at her cheeks, still flushed from embarrassment, and the warm water eyes still a little red from earlier tears, but beneath all that, something else. Something like wonder. This man, this complete stranger, had just witnessed her at her absolute worst. Covered in mud, humiliated by teenagers, phone dead limping and utterly mortified. And instead of making an excuse and leaving, instead of being annoyed or uncomfortable, he'd bought her a dress and waited patiently while she cleaned up. Who does that? The thought scared her as much as it warmed her, because Sarah had been on enough bad dates to know that kindness like this was rare. Kindness without expectation. Kindness that showed up even when things got messy, especially when things got messy. She'd dated men who got irritated when she was 5 minutes late due to public transportation delays. Men who complained when she couldn't make dinner plans because of emergency children's programs at the library. Men who saw her lack of family as a red flag rather than simply part of her story. And here was someone who'd seen her fall apart literally, and his response had been to help. Not to judge, not to flee, not to make her feel worse about an already awful situation, but to simply extend a hand and say, "Come with me." Sarah touched the fabric of the dress, soft cotton under her fingertips. It fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her. Through the bathroom door, she could hear Mike's voice, warm and easy, talking with Stella about renovations and architectural details. His laugh was rich and genuine, the kind that made you want to smile even if you weren't part of the conversation. She closed her eyes for a moment, pressing her hand against her chest, where her heart was still beating too fast. "Don't mess this up," she told herself quietly. "Whatever this is, don't mess it up." When she emerged from the bathroom, Mike was chatting with Stella near the front of the store. They were talking about the boutique's recent renovation, something about skylights and natural light. Mike designed the whole thing, Stella was saying proudly. Knocked out that wall, added those gorgeous skylights, completely transformed the space. I went from feeling cramped and dark to having the most beautiful shop on the block. Mike turned when he heard Sarah approach, and his expression shifted in a way that made her stomach flutter. His smile widened, reaching his eyes, and there was something appreciative but respectful in the way he looked at her. "Much better," he said simply. Then more quietly, "Though I have to say, you handled that whole situation with more grace than most people would have." Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I think falling into a mud puddle is the opposite of graceful. I mean, after Mike said, 'You could have run away. You could have ghosted me and saved yourself the embarrassment.' Most people would have. Instead, you showed up and faced it head on. That takes real courage." They thanked Stella, who waved away their gratitude with the easy grace of someone who'd made a career out of helping people feel beautiful. As they walked back toward the Bluebird Cafe, Sarah found herself hyper-aware of everything. The way Mike shortened his stride to match her pace. How he offered his arm when he noticed her still favoring her ankle, the comfortable silence that had settled between them. The teenagers across the street were gone now, probably off to share their videos of her spectacular fall with the internet. The puddle still sat there, muddy and treacherous, a reminder of her earlier disaster. But somehow walking next to Mike, it felt less humiliating and more like something they'd laugh about someday. If there was a someday. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said as they approached the restaurant. "Anything. Why didn't you leave? I mean, really?" Be honest. Most men would have seen that mess and made a polite excuse. Mike was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. My wife died 3 years ago, he said finally. Sudden aneurysm. One moment she was making breakfast, singing off-key while she scrambled eggs, and by evening she was gone. Sarah's breath caught. Mike, I'm so sorry, thank you. He held the cafe door open for her, the gesture automatic and courteous. The point is, I learned something about people in the aftermath. I learned that some people run when things get messy. Friends who couldn't handle my grief, family members who felt uncomfortable around a widower with a small child. They just disappeared when life got complicated. They were seated at the same window table where Mike had been waiting earlier. It felt like years had passed since then, though it had been less than an hour. But there were others, Mike continued, who showed up anyway, who brought casseroles when I forgot to feed Emma dinner, who sat with me in the hospital during Emma's emergency appendectomy last year, even though it meant missing their own plans. People who chose presence over comfort. He met her eyes across the table. Tonight, when I saw you standing outside that window, I had a choice. I could take the easy way out and pretend I didn't see you, or I could remember the people who showed up for me when I needed it most. He smiled. I want to be the kind of person who shows up. I want Emma to learn that from me. Sarah felt tears threaten again, but these were different from the tears of humiliation she'd shed earlier. These came from a place of recognition, of feeling seen in a way that was both terrifying and wonderful. Tell me about her, she said softly. Tell me about Emma. And just like that, Mike's entire demeanor transformed. His shoulders relaxed, his eyes lit up, and his smile became the kind that came from deep love and pride. She's 7 going on 70, he said, pulling out his phone. Smart as a whip, completely convinced she knows more about life than I do, and she might be right. He showed her a photo, a beaming little girl with his brown hair and bright green eyes, holding up what appeared to be a failed magic trick with playing cards scattered around her small hands. She gave me a pep talk before this date, Mike admitted. Said I needed to stop being scared of feelings, Daddy, and that maybe it was time to find someone who could teach her about girl stuff, because I'm apparently hopeless at braiding hair. Sarah laughed, the sound surprising her with its lightness. Wise girl. She gets that from her dad, I'm guessing. Actually, she gets it from her mother. The way Mike said it, past tense but gentle, made Sarah's heart ache for him. Jennifer was the wisest person I ever knew. She always said that kindness was a choice and that you could tell everything you needed to know about someone by how they treated people who couldn't do anything for them. She sounds like she was an incredible woman. She was. Mike looked down at the photo of his daughter, his thumb brushing gently across the screen. Emma barely remembers her now, which breaks my heart some days. But she's also the reason I get up every morning, the reason I'm here tonight, actually. The conversation flowed effortlessly after that, as if the earlier disaster had broken through all the normal first date awkwardness and gotten straight to what mattered. Sarah told him about her work at the library, about the magic of watching a reluctant reader discover their first beloved book, about the reading programs that had become her passion and purpose. There's this boy, Marcus, she said, her face lighting up with the same pride Mike had shown when talking about Emma. He's 8, and he hated reading when he first came to our program. His parents were so worried about him falling behind. But I found this graphic novel series about dragons, and now he devours 3 books a week. His mother cried when she thanked me. Mike watched her talk, captivated by the passion that animated her features. You love what you do. I really do. Kids are honest in a way adults forget how to be. They don't pretend or put up facades. They show you exactly who they are and what they need. They talked about Mike's architectural firm, about the homes he designed that prioritized natural light and family spaces. Sarah shared stories about growing up in foster care, about learning independence early, and finding family in unexpected places. They discovered a shared love of old movies and strong coffee of hiking in the Columbia River Gorge and the way Portland looked in the rain. By the time their server discreetly placed the check on their table, it was nearly 11 o'clock. The restaurant had emptied around them, other diners coming and going, while they remained lost in conversation. "I know tonight didn't start the way either of us planned," Mike said, as he walked her to the corner where she could catch a taxi back to her apartment in southeast Portland. "But I'm really glad you waved at me through that window instead of just walking away." "Me too," Sarah admitted, surprised by how much she meant it. "Though I'm definitely wearing sneakers on our second date." Mike's expression shifted, becoming hopeful and vulnerable in a way that made her stomach flutter all over again. "Second date, if you're interested." "After seeing me at my absolute worst," Sarah, Mike said. Stepping closer, "I'm very interested. In fact, I think seeing you at what you call your worst might have been the best thing that could have happened tonight. How do you figure that?" "Because now I know who you really are. Not just the polished version you would have presented on a normal first date, but the real you. The woman who falls down and gets back up, who faces embarrassment with dignity, who shows up even when it's hard." He reached out and gently touched her hand. "That's the woman I'd like to get to know better." They stood there for a moment, neither quite wanting to end the evening despite the late hour. Finally, Sarah flagged down a taxi, and Mike helped her into the back seat with the same careful attention he'd shown all night. "Good night, Sarah. Good night, Mike." As the taxi pulled away from the curb, Sarah watched Mike through the rear window. He stood on the sidewalk, watching the taillights disappear. One hand in his pocket, the other running through his hair. In what she was already learning was a nervous habit. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Sarah felt something she'd almost forgotten how to feel: hope. The second date had to be postponed when Emma came down with the flu 3 days after their meeting at the Bluebird Cafe. Mike texted Sarah apologetically from the pediatrician's office, where his daughter was running a fever of 102 and throwing up everything she tried to keep down. "Emma's really sick. Can't leave her with anyone." "Rain check." Sarah's response came back within minutes. "Don't apologize. Take care of your girl. We'll reschedule when she's better." The simple understanding in her words made Mike smile despite his worry. No guilt trip, no irritation about changed plans. Just acceptance that his daughter had to come first. The third attempt at a second date was derailed by a work emergency for Sarah. A pipe had burst in the library's children's section over the weekend, flooding the area and destroying dozens of books. She spent 3 12-hour days salvaging what she could and organizing community donation drives to replace the damaged collection. "I'm so sorry." Rain check again. "This is becoming a pattern. Don't be sorry. Let me know if I can help with anything." It was 3 weeks before they finally managed to meet again, but those 3 weeks were filled with daily text messages that gradually turned into phone calls that sometimes lasted past midnight. They learned about each other in fragments, building intimacy through shared stories and late-night laughter. Mike told her about Emma's obsession with magic tricks and her determination to become the first 7-year-old professional magician. Sarah shared her favorite children's book recommendations and the story of the 10-year-old who'd taught her that graphic novels about superheroes could be just as profound as classic literature. "What's your biggest fear about dating again?" Sarah asked one Thursday night, her voice soft through the phone as she curled up on her couch in her small apartment. Mike was quiet for so long that Sarah wondered if the call had dropped. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw with honesty. "Forgetting her. I know that sounds crazy, but sometimes I wake up and I can't remember exactly what Jennifer's laugh sounded like, or the way she smelled like vanilla and coffee in the morning. I'm terrified that if I let someone new in, I'll lose those pieces of her entirely." "That's not crazy at all," Sarah said gently. "But Mike, loving someone new doesn't erase the love you had before. Hearts aren't hard drives with limited storage. They expand. Is that from experience? Sarah laughed softly. No, that's from working with kids who've lost parents. I've seen 7-year-olds learn to love foster parents without forgetting their birth families. Love isn't a competition between past and present. What about you, Mike asked. What scares you? Not being enough, Sarah admitted. Growing up in foster care teaches you that love is conditional, temporary. That if you're too much trouble or not grateful enough or just not what people expected, they'll send you back. I'm terrified of falling for someone and then having them realize I'm not worth the effort. Sarah Mike's voice was firm, that says everything about those people and nothing about you. You are absolutely worth the effort. These conversations, honest and vulnerable in the darkness, built something between them that felt deeper than typical early dating. They were learning each other's fears and dreams, scars and hopes, creating a foundation of understanding that would serve them well in the months to come. When they finally sat down for coffee on a Wednesday afternoon at a small cafe near Emma's school, it felt less like a second date and more like coming home to someone they'd known for years. I missed you, Mike said simply as they settled into a corner table, surrounded by the familiar sounds of espresso machines and quiet conversation. Sarah's smile was radiant, transforming her entire face. I missed you too. 3 weeks of talking to you every night, and I was starting to forget what you look like in person. And still handsome. Maybe more so because now I know you're kind and patient, and you make terrible dad jokes during our phone calls. They spent 2 hours talking about everything and nothing. Mike showed her photos from Emma's school play where she'd played a tree and taken her role very seriously. Sarah told him about the new teen volunteer who'd overcome her shyness by leading story time for the preschoolers. I want you to meet her, Mike said, as they prepared to leave his hand finding hers across the small table. Emma. But I want to do it right on her timeline. Sarah squeezed his fingers gently. Whenever you're both ready, I'm not going anywhere. The promise in those words settled something in Mike's chest that had been restless for weeks. It was 2 more weeks before Mike felt ready to introduce Emma to Sarah, and another week before he could convince his daughter that meeting Daddy's friend might be fun. Emma had been protective of their little family unit since Jennifer's death, and Mike knew that any woman he brought into their lives would have to earn his daughter's approval. They met at a casual restaurant with a kids' menu and crayons on every table, nothing formal that might put pressure on a 7-year-old. Sarah arrived with a canvas bag full of books she'd carefully selected based on everything Mike had told her about Emma's interests. Magic animals and stories about brave girls who solved problems. Emma walked in holding her father's hand, eyeing Sarah with the kind of serious suspicion only children could master. She was smaller than Sarah had expected, with Mike's warm brown hair in pigtails and bright green eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. They sat down, ordered food, and made small talk about the weather and the restaurant's crayon selection. Then, barely 5 minutes in, Emma looked directly at Sarah with the bluntness that made Mike simultaneously proud and mortified. Are you Daddy's girlfriend? Emma. Mike started, but Sarah held up a gentle hand. I'm your daddy's friend, Sarah said honestly. Is that okay? Emma studied her with those sharp green eyes, clearly processing this information. Do you like magic tricks? I love them, Sarah replied seriously, but I'm terrible at figuring them out. Perfect. Emma declared, her entire face transforming as suspicion gave way to excitement. Because I'm really good at them, and I don't like when people guess too fast. It ruins the mystery. For the next hour, Emma performed her entire repertoire of magic tricks. Card tricks learned from YouTube videos, coin tricks that mostly involved sleight of hand, and one truly spectacular disappearing napkin trick that involved shoving it under the table while maintaining eye contact. Sarah watched each performance with rapt attention, gasping at all the right moments and declaring herself completely stumped by Emma's skills. She asked thoughtful questions about technique and complimented Emma's showmanship, treating her like the serious magician she aspired to be. Mike watched them both, his heart doing something complicated and wonderful in his chest. Emma was responding to Sarah's genuine interest, blossoming under the attention of an adult who took her passions seriously. And Sarah was navigating the interaction with natural grace, neither talking down to Emma nor trying too hard to impress her. After lunch, as they walked to their cars, Emma reached up and took Sarah's hand with the casual confidence of childhood. "You're nice," she announced. "You can come to dinner at our house sometime." Sarah looked at Mike over Emma's head, her eyebrows raised in question. He shrugged with a helpless smile that said, "She's made her decision." "I'd love to," Sarah told Emma, "but only if your dad thinks it's a good idea, too." "He does," Emma said matter-of-factly. "He talks about you all the time. He thinks I can't hear him when he's on the phone, but I can. He laughs different when he talks to you." Mike felt his cheeks warm, caught by his perceptive daughter. "Emma, it's a good different," Emma clarified generously. "Like how he used to laugh with Mommy." The comment could have been painful, a reminder of what Mike had lost. Instead, it felt like permission from his daughter to find happiness again, to let Sarah into the space that had been empty for 3 years. That night, after Emma was asleep, Mike called Sarah from his back porch, looking up at the October stars and feeling more hopeful than he had in years. "I think that went well," he said, without preamble. "Your daughter is incredible, Mike. Funny and smart and so confident. You've done an amazing job with her. She likes you. She doesn't like everyone. I like her too. She's got your eyes and your sense of humor, but there's something else there, something strong and independent." "She gets that from her mother," Mike said softly. "Jennifer was the strongest person I ever knew. I see her in Emma every day." There was comfortable silence for a moment, the kind that spoke of growing intimacy and shared understanding. Sarah's voice was tentative. "Thank you for letting me meet her, for trusting me with something so important." "Thank you for being someone worth trusting," he replied. "Emma's approval isn't something I take lightly. She's had to deal with enough loss and change. I understand, and I want you to know I'm not trying to replace anyone or rush into anything. I just want to be part of your lives in whatever way feels right for all of us." Mike closed his eyes, feeling something settle in his chest that had been restless for months. "I'd like that, Sarah. I'd like that very much." Over the next 2 months, Sarah gradually became part of the rhythm of Mike and Emma's lives. It started with Sunday dinners at Mike's craftsman-style home in Irvington, Emma insisting that Sarah needed to see their house and learn about their weekly traditions. The house was everything Sarah had imagined. It would be warm and lived in, with built-in bookshelves, original hardwood floors, and large windows that let in the filtered light that made Portland famous. There were signs of Emma everywhere. Art projects on the refrigerator, magic supplies scattered across the coffee table, a reading nook in the living room corner piled with picture books and chapter books she was just beginning to tackle. "Daddy built that for me," Emma announced, proudly pointing to the reading nook. "He said every magician needs a place to study. And every reader needs a place to dream," Mike added, appearing from the kitchen with a dish towel over his shoulder. "Dinner's ready. Hope you like slightly burnt grilled cheese and definitely burnt tomato soup." "It's not burnt," Emma corrected. "It's caramelized. That's what Daddy says when the smoke alarm goes off." Sarah laughed, falling easily into the teasing banter that seemed to characterize their household. She quickly learned that Mike was a devoted father, but a mediocre cook, that Emma had opinions about everything from the proper way to arrange crayons to the superiority of strawberry ice cream over vanilla, and that Sunday dinners were sacred time for just the 3 of them. She also learned about the photographs that lined the hallways and covered the mantel. Jennifer was everywhere in the house, not as a shrine, but as a natural part of their family story. Emma would point to pictures and share memories that were probably more constructed than real. She'd been so young when her mother died. But Mike never corrected her understanding that these stories were how his daughter kept her mother alive in her heart. "That's Mommy teaching me to ride my bike," Emma said one Sunday, showing Sarah a photo of a laughing woman pushing a tiny Emma on a bright pink bicycle. She said falling down was just practice for getting back up. "Your mommy sounds like she was very wise," Sarah said gently. "She was. Daddy says I have her stubbornness and her sense of humor, but I have his eyes and his terrible singing voice." Mike appeared behind them, ruffling Emma's hair. "Hey, now my singing voice isn't terrible. It's distinctive." Same thing Emma said with 7-year-old wisdom. These Sunday dinners became the foundation for something deeper. Sarah learned Emma's routines and preferences, discovered that she hated green beans, but loved broccoli, that she could only fall asleep if someone read her exactly 2 stories, and that she had an elaborate bedtime ritual involving her stuffed elephant Mr. Trunks and a specific arrangement of night lights. More importantly, Sarah learned to navigate the delicate balance of caring for a child who wasn't hers, but who was gradually accepting her presence. She never tried to parent Emma or override Mike's decisions, but she offered support and attention that the little girl had been missing. Someone to braid her hair for school much better than Mike's attempts. Someone to help with art projects that required more patience than her father possessed. Someone to listen to her latest magic trick ideas with genuine enthusiasm. Mike watched this developing relationship with wonder and gratitude. Sarah never pushed for more than Emma was ready to give, but she also didn't hold back her affection when it was welcomed. She celebrated Emma's small victories and comforted her during minor disappointments with the natural ease of someone who understood children. The first major test of their growing bond came in early November, on the 3rd anniversary of Jennifer's death. Mike had been dreading the date for weeks, knowing from experience that Emma often struggled emotionally around this time of year, without fully understanding why. The meltdown came on a Friday evening after school. Emma had been unusually quiet during homework time, picking at her dinner and giving short answers to Mike's questions about her day. Then, seemingly without warning, she exploded. It started with frustration over a math problem that she couldn't solve. Emma threw her pencil across the room and declared that everything was stupid and hard, and she hated homework. When Mike tried to help, she pushed his hand away and screamed that he was doing it wrong. "I want Mommy," she sobbed, suddenly the real issue finally emerging. "I want Mommy to help me with math like she used to. I want her to come home." "Why can't she come home?" Mike's heart broke as he gathered his daughter into his arms, feeling her small body shake with grief that was still too big for her to fully understand. Emma cried for 20 minutes, deep wailing sobs that came from a place of loss that would never fully heal. Sarah had been there for dinner, helping clean up in the kitchen while Mike supervised homework time. When Emma's crying started, she immediately stepped back, recognizing that this was a moment between father and daughter that didn't require her presence. She quietly gathered her things and left through the back door, texting Mike later to let him know she'd gone home and was thinking of them both. "Take all the time you need. I'm here if you want to talk later." That night, after Emma had finally cried herself to sleep in Mike's bed, he sat on his back porch and called Sarah. "I'm sorry about tonight," he said without preamble. "I should have warned you that this time of year is hard for Emma. The anniversary is Sunday. Don't apologize." Sarah's voice was gentle through the phone. "Is she okay? She will be. This happens sometimes, usually around Jennifer's birthday or the anniversary. Emma doesn't always remember why she's sad, but her body remembers." That makes sense. Grief isn't logical, especially for children. "Is there anything I can do?" Mike was quiet for a moment, touched by the offer and the lack of judgment in her voice. "Just be patient with us. Some days are harder than others." Of course, take whatever time you need this weekend. I'll be here when you're ready. The easy acceptance, the lack of drama or demands for explanation meant more to Mike than Sarah probably realized. In his experience, dating as a single parent meant constantly apologizing for his daughter's needs, for the ways that grief and loss complicated their lives. But Sarah seemed to understand instinctively that loving him meant loving Emma, complicated emotions and all. Sunday, the actual anniversary, was quiet and reflective. Mike and Emma visited Jennifer's grave at Riverside Cemetery, bringing fresh flowers and Emma's latest art project to show her mom. They spent the afternoon looking through photo albums and telling stories. Emma curled up in Mike's lap as he shared memories of the woman who would always be her first mother. That evening, Sarah sent a simple text, "Thinking of you both today." She didn't ask to join them or insert herself into their grief process. She simply acknowledged that this was a day that mattered, and that they weren't going through it alone. The thoughtfulness of the gesture, the way she held space for their loss, without making it about her own discomfort, told Mike everything he needed to know about the kind of person Sarah was. By December, their relationship had settled into a comfortable rhythm that felt sustainable and healthy for all three of them. Sarah joined them for weekend activities, trips to the farmer's market, visits to the children's museum, movie nights at home. But she maintained her own apartment and independence. Emma had started calling her Sarah instead of Daddy's friend, a small shift that indicated growing acceptance and affection. The real turning point came during the first week of December, when Emma came down with a stomach bug that left her miserable and clingy. Mike had to work. He was in the middle of designing a custom home for an important client. But Emma was too sick for school and too needy to stay with their usual babysitter. Sarah offered to take the day off from the library to stay with Emma. And Mike's relief was immediate and profound. "Are you sure she's pretty pathetic when she's sick? Lots of whimpering and demands for specific snacks." "I'm sure. Besides, I happen to be an expert in caring for pathetic, sick children. It's basically a requirement for working in youth services." Sarah spent the day on Mike's couch with Emma, watching Disney movies and bringing her tiny sips of ginger ale and crackers. When Emma's fever spiked in the afternoon, Sarah knew exactly when to call Mike and when to handle it herself. She made Emma laugh with silly voices during story time and stayed calm when Emma threw up on her sweater. Mike came home to find them both asleep on the couch, Emma curled up against Sarah's side, both of them covered by the Afghan Jennifer had crocheted years ago. The sight of his daughter so comfortable and cared for by this woman he was falling in love with made his chest tight with emotion. That night, after Emma was feeling better and tucked into her own bed, Mike and Sarah sat in his living room with cups of tea and finally addressed what was happening between them. "Thank you for today," Mike said, "for taking care of her like she was your own." "I care about her, Mike. A lot. And I care about you." "I care about you too," he said, reaching for her hand. "More than I thought I was ready for." They were quiet for a moment, both acknowledging the weight of what they were building together. "I need you to know something," Mike said finally. "Emma comes first. Always. I learned the hard way that I only get one chance to raise her right, and I won't compromise that for anyone." "I wouldn't want you to," Sarah replied. "Mike, I'm not trying to compete with Emma or replace Jennifer. I just want to love you both in whatever way works for your family." What if that changes? What if you decide that being with a single parent is more complicated than you want to deal with? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and Mike felt his heart clench with familiar fear. But when she spoke, her voice was steady and sure. "Mike, I grew up without a family. Without people who chose to love me every day. What you and Emma have, what you're offering to share with me, that's everything I've ever wanted. I'm not going anywhere unless you ask me to." The promise in her words settled something in Mike's heart that had been unsure for months. This woman understood what it meant to choose love every day, to show up even when things got messy. To be family by choice rather than obligation. "I love you, Sarah," he said, the words coming easier than he'd expected. "I love you, and Emma loves you, and I think we'd like you to be part of our family. Really part of it." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I love you too. Both of you. So much." When they kissed, it felt like coming home. And upstairs Emma smiled in her sleep, dreaming of magic tricks and the nice lady who read stories with all the right voices and who made Daddy laugh like he used to when Mommy was alive. Winter in Portland brought its own rhythm to their relationship. The holidays were approaching, and Mike found himself navigating the complex emotions that came with celebrating Christmas without Jennifer for the 4th time, but with Sarah for the 1st time. Emma had definite opinions about their holiday traditions and was initially resistant to any changes Sarah might bring. "We always put the star on top together," she informed Sarah seriously during their first tree decorating session in Mike's living room. "Daddy lifts me up and I put it on because I'm the only kid, and kids get to do the important stuff." "That sounds like a perfect tradition," Sarah agreed. "I wouldn't want to change it." But as the afternoon progressed, Emma gradually included Sarah in their rituals. She taught her the right way to hang ornaments evenly spaced, no clumps, and explained the story behind each decoration. The wooden angel Jennifer had made during Emma's first Christmas, the construction paper snowflakes from Emma's preschool years, the silver bells that had belonged to Mike's grandmother. "This one's new," Emma announced, holding up a beautiful glass ornament shaped like an open book. "Daddy got it because Sarah works at the library and loves books." Sarah felt tears threaten as she took the ornament, understanding the significance of being included in their collection of memories. "It's beautiful. Thank you. Now you're part of our Christmas," Emma said matter-of-factly. "Next year we'll probably have 2 new ornaments because that's how it works." The assumption of a future together, spoken with childhood certainty, made both adults smile. Christmas Eve brought their first real challenge. Sarah had been invited to spend the evening with Mike and Emma, but as the day approached, she found herself struggling with unexpected anxiety. What if she was intruding on sacred family time? What if Emma decided she wanted it to be just her and Daddy, like it used to be? The panic attack hit her while she was wrapping Emma's gifts in her apartment. Suddenly she couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the certainty that she was making a mistake. She was inserting herself into a family that had managed fine without her presuming to fill a space that maybe wasn't meant to be filled. Mike found her sitting on her bathroom floor 20 minutes later when he came to pick her up, and she didn't answer her door. He'd used the spare key she'd given him, calling out her name until he found her. "Sarah, what's wrong?" He knelt beside her, immediately recognizing the signs of a panic attack from his own experience with anxiety after Jennifer's death. "I can't do this," Sarah gasped. "I can't intrude on your Christmas. Emma should have you to herself. I'm not family, I'm just someone who showed up and presumed to belong." Mike gathered her into his arms, holding her steady while she trembled. "Breathe with me," he said calmly. "In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. That's it." When her breathing finally steadied, he cupped her face gently in his hands. "Sarah, look at me. You're not intruding. You're not presuming anything. Emma asked me yesterday if you were coming to Christmas Eve dinner, and when I said yes, she said, 'Good, like it was obvious you'd be there. But what if I'm replacing—'" "You're not replacing anyone," Mike said firmly. "Jennifer will always be Emma's mother, but that doesn't mean there isn't room for you too. Hearts expand, remember. You taught me that." Sarah leaned into him, drawing strength from his certainty. "I just don't want to mess this up. You and Emma, you're everything to me. And you're everything to us. Emma made you a present, Sarah. She's been working on it for weeks. She's so excited to give it to you that she's been bouncing off the walls all day." The knowledge that Emma had been thinking of her, planning for her, wanting her there, finally broke through Sarah's anxiety. Christmas Eve dinner was everything Sarah had hoped it would be. Emma presented her handmade gift with great ceremony, a photo album filled with pictures from the past few months. Sarah at the farmer's market laughing at one of Emma's jokes. Sarah and Emma reading together on the couch. Sarah helping Emma with a particularly challenging magic trick. "So you can remember all our fun times," Emma explained. "Daddy says pictures help us remember the good stuff." Sarah felt tears stream down her face as she turned through the pages. "Emma, this is the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me. Really better than grown-up stuff like jewelry. So much better. This is love, and that's worth more than anything else in the world." That night, after Emma was asleep and they'd finished assembling her new bicycle for Christmas morning, Mike and Sarah sat by the Christmas tree with glasses of wine and the comfortable exhaustion that came from a perfect day. "I'm sorry about earlier," Sarah said, "about the panic attack and the doubts. Don't apologize. This is all new territory for all of us. It's okay to be scared sometimes. It's just that I've never been part of a real family before. I don't always know how to do it right." Mike set down his wine and pulled her closer. "Sarah, there is no right way to do family. There's just love and showing up and figuring it out as you go. You're doing beautifully. How do you know? Because Emma lights up when you're here. Because she talks about you at school and asks for you when you're not around. Because she made you a photo album and spent 3 hours arranging the pictures in the exact right order." He kissed her temple softly. "Because you belong here and we both feel it." The new year brought its own challenges and growth. Sarah's confidence as a parental figure grew gradually, and she began to take on more responsibilities naturally. She learned Emma's schedule by heart, knew which friends she was struggling with at school, understood the difference between her tired tears and her frustrated tears. In February, Sarah faced her biggest test yet. Emma came home from school with a behavior report indicating she'd been disruptive during math class and disrespectful to her teacher. Mike was at a client meeting and couldn't be reached, leaving Sarah to handle the situation alone. Emma was defensive and angry, insisting the teacher was being unfair and that she hadn't done anything wrong. Sarah recognized the behavior for what it was. A 7-year-old testing boundaries and looking for someone to blame for her own frustration. Instead of lecturing or punishing immediately, Sarah sat down with Emma and asked questions. "Tell me what happened. All of it from the beginning." Slowly, the real story emerged. Emma had been struggling with long division for weeks, but hadn't wanted to admit it. When the teacher called on her to solve a problem on the board, Emma had frozen, then lashed out in embarrassment. "I felt stupid in front of everyone," Emma admitted, tears finally coming. "And I hate feeling stupid." "Oh, sweetheart," Sarah said, pulling Emma into a hug. "Everyone struggles with learning new things. That's not stupid, that's human." They spent the next hour working through math problems together, Sarah breaking down the concepts in different ways until Emma began to understand. When Mike got home, he found them at the kitchen table, Emma proudly showing off her newly mastered division skills. "Sarah helped me figure it out," Emma announced. "She didn't get mad about the behavior report. She just helped me understand the math that was making me crazy." Mike looked at Sarah with something that might have been awe. "Thank you," he mouthed over Emma's head. Later that evening, after Emma was in bed, they debriefed the incident. "How did you know to approach it that way?" Mike asked. "Experience with kids at the library and remembering what it felt like to be her age and scared of failing. Sometimes acting out is just fear wearing a costume. You're going to be an amazing mother someday," Mike said softly. The comment hung in the air between them, heavy with implication and possibility. They'd been together for 6 months now, and while they'd talked about their future in general terms, they hadn't yet discussed specifics like marriage or expanding their family. "Is that something you think about?" Sarah asked carefully. "Having more children?" Mike was quiet for a moment. I think about it more since meeting you. Before, I couldn't imagine loving anyone the way I loved Jennifer, or wanting to start over with someone new. But with you... He trailed off, then started again. What about you? Do you want children of your own? I want children with you, Sarah said honestly. Biological adopted, however, they come to us. But I also want you to know that Emma is enough. If it was just the three of us forever, that would be everything I could ask for. The honesty in her voice, the way she'd included Emma in her vision of their future, made Mike's decision for him. He'd been carrying around his grandmother's engagement ring for 3 weeks, waiting for the right moment. Maybe there was no perfect moment, only honest ones. Sarah, he said, standing up and walking to the kitchen drawer where he'd hidden the small velvet box. I have something to ask you. Spring arrived in Portland with its usual dramatic flair, transforming the city from grey and drizzly to explosively green almost overnight. The cherry trees bloomed in clouds of pink and white. The farmers' market overflowed with spring vegetables and early strawberries. And Emma's energy level increased proportionally with the daylight hours. Sarah had been part of their lives for 8 months now, and the relationship felt natural and sustainable in ways that surprised all of them. She had her own key to Mike's house, her own drawer in his bedroom dresser, her own coffee mug in the kitchen cabinet. Emma automatically included her in school permission forms when they asked for emergency contacts. The three of them moved together with the easy rhythm of family. Mike found himself marveling at how seamlessly Sarah had integrated into their lives. She attended Emma's school events as naturally as any parent, cheering from the sidelines during soccer games and helping with art projects that required more patience than he possessed. The other parents had begun including her in group texts and playdate plans, accepting her as part of Emma's family constellation without question. Ms. Sarah knows everything about books, Emma announced to her second-grade class during show and tell when she'd brought Sarah as her special guest to talk about the library's summer reading program. She can find the perfect book for anyone, even kids who think they hate reading. Watching Sarah work with Emma's class, seeing her natural ease with children and her genuine passion for literacy, Mike felt his heart swell with pride and love. This was who Sarah was at her core, someone who believed in the transformative power of stories, who saw potential in every child, who created safe spaces, young minds to grow and explore. After the presentation, as they walked back to Mike's car through the school parking lot, Emma skipping ahead to chase dandelion fluff, Sarah slipped her hand into his. "Thank you for letting me be part of that," she said. "I love seeing your world through Emma's eyes. Thank you for being part of it. Did you see how proud she was to introduce you?" "You're her person, Sarah." The words hung between them, significant and weighty. Sarah was Emma's person, the adult she turned to for comfort and guidance and celebration. And Mike was Sarah's person, the man who'd held out his hand when she was covered in mud, and who continued to choose her every day since. They were building something real and lasting, something that honored the past while embracing the future. Jennifer's memory was woven throughout their relationship, not as a competing presence, but as a foundational part of who Mike was. Sarah had learned to love that part of him too, understanding that his capacity for devotion was what made him such an extraordinary partner and father. The ring had been hidden in Mike's sock drawer for 2 months now. He'd bought it after that conversation about children and the future, but finding the right moment for a proposal proved more challenging than he'd anticipated. Every time he planned something elaborate, life intervened. Work deadlines, Emma's school activities, Sarah's busy schedule at the library during spring reading program season. Finally, on a perfectly ordinary Saturday in May, Mike stopped trying to orchestrate the perfect moment and decided to trust in imperfect timing. They were at the farmers' market, their usual Saturday morning routine. Emma was carrying a basket of early strawberries, chattering to Sarah about her plans for a magic show at the end of school party. The morning was warm and bright, the kind of Portland spring day that made residents forget all about the long grey winter. "Can we get flowers for the kitchen table?" Emma asked, spotting a vendor with buckets of tulips and daffodils. "Of course," Sarah said, already heading toward the flower stand with Emma. "What colors do you think would look good in your kitchen?" Mike watched them deliberate over flower choices. Emma, taking the decision very seriously, while Sarah offered opinions and suggestions. The sight of them together, heads bent over flower buckets, debating the merits of yellow versus white tulips, made his chest tight with love. This was his family. This woman who'd stumbled into their lives covered in mud and transformed everything by simply showing up. This little girl who'd learned to love again after loss, who'd opened her heart to include someone new without forgetting her first mother. This life they'd built together, ordinary and extraordinary all at once. Mike pulled the ring box from his jacket pocket, his heart hammering against his ribs. He'd been carrying it everywhere for weeks just in case the moment felt right. Standing in the farmer's market surrounded by spring flowers and Saturday morning crowds, watching his daughter and the woman he loved laugh together over tulip colors, the moment finally felt perfect. "Emma," he called softly. "Sarah, can you come here for a second?" They approached with their arms full of bright yellow tulips. Emma chattering about how yellow was the color of sunshine and happiness. When they reached him, Mike took a deep breath and dropped to one knee right there in the middle of the farmer's market. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth, the tulips scattering as she realized what was happening. Emma's eyes went wide with excitement and surprise. "Sarah Mitchell," Mike said, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "8 months ago, you showed up to our first date covered in mud, and it was the best thing that ever happened to us." "Daddy," Emma whispered urgently. "People are looking." Mike glanced around and realized they'd attracted quite an audience of fellow shoppers, but he didn't care. This was about his family, his future, his heart laid bare in front of the produce vendors and flower stands. "You've taught Emma that love doesn't replace love, it multiplies it. You've taught me that hearts can heal without forgetting. You've shown up for us in every way that matters, and I want you to keep showing up for the rest of our lives." He opened the ring box, revealing his grandmother's vintage engagement ring, a classic solitaire that caught the morning light. "Will you marry me? Will you be Emma's stepmom and my wife, and part of our family forever?" "Yes," Sarah cried, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." The farmer's market erupted in applause as Mike slipped the ring onto Sarah's finger and stood to kiss her. Emma threw herself at both of them, wrapping her arms around their legs in a fierce hug. "We're getting married," Emma announced to the crowd of onlookers. "Sarah's going to be my mom, and we're going to be a real official family." "We already are a family, sweetheart," Sarah said, kneeling down to Emma's level. "This just makes it official. Can I be the flower girl? Can I wear a pretty dress? Can we have chocolate cake instead of vanilla? Because vanilla is boring." Mike and Sarah laughed, pulling Emma into a three-way hug as strangers continued to congratulate them, and the flower vendor insisted on giving Sarah a fresh bouquet as an engagement gift. "We're getting married," Sarah said wonderingly, looking at the ring sparkling on her finger. "We're getting married?" Mike confirmed, kissing her again, to the delight of their impromptu audience. As they walked back to the car with their market purchases and their life-changing news, Emma skipped between them, holding both their hands and talking a mile a minute about wedding plans and flower girl duties and whether they could get a dog now that they were going to be an official family. "Can we call Aunt Rebecca?" Emma asked as Mike loaded their groceries into the car. "She'll want to know about the engagement since she's the one who made you meet in the first place." "Absolutely," Mike said. "In fact, I think Aunt Rebecca is going to be very smug about her matchmaking skills." "What's smug mean?" It means acting like you knew something would happen all along, Sarah explained. Oh, then yes, Aunt Rebecca is definitely going to be smug. She told me Daddy needed a wife and I needed a mom, and now we're getting both. As they drove home through the tree-lined streets of their neighborhood, spring sunshine streaming through the windows and Emma chattering about wedding plans from the back seat, Sarah felt a deep contentment settle in her chest. This was what happiness looked like. Not perfect, not dramatic, just real and lasting and full of love. A man who'd seen her at her worst and chosen to love her anyway. A little girl who'd accepted her into their family with open arms. A future full of ordinary moments that would add up to an extraordinary life. She looked at the ring on her finger, then at Mike's hand on the gear shift, then back at Emma in the rearview mirror. Her family. The family she'd never thought she'd have built from choice and patience and showing up for each other every single day. I love you, she said, meaning it for all of them. We love you too, Emma replied immediately. Forever and ever, right, Daddy, forever and ever. Mike confirmed, squeezing Sarah's hand. And in that moment, driving through Portland with the windows down and her heart full, Sarah believed it completely. The engagement ring felt foreign on Sarah's finger as she tried to focus on her work at the library Monday morning. Every time she moved her hand, the diamond caught the light, sending little rainbows across her desk and reminding her that her entire life had changed in the space of a Saturday morning farmer's market trip. You're glowing, observed Rebecca Martinez, the teen services librarian who'd become Sarah's closest friend at work. And you keep staring at your left hand. Should I be preparing for exciting news? Sarah looked up from the pile of summer reading program registration forms she'd been attempting to organize, a smile spreading across her face, despite her efforts to remain professional. Mike proposed, she said simply, holding out her hand to display the vintage solitaire. Rebecca shrieked loud enough to disturb the quiet study atmosphere, then immediately clapped her hand over her mouth. Sorry, she whispered to the patrons who'd looked up from their books. Sarah, it's gorgeous. When? How? Tell me everything. As Sarah related the story of the farmer's market proposal, she found herself marveling again at how perfectly ordinary and extraordinarily romantic it had been. No elaborate planning, no grand gestures, just Mike recognizing the right moment and trusting his instincts. He said he'd been carrying the ring for 2 months waiting for the perfect moment, Sarah explained. But then he realized that any moment with us was perfect. That man is a keeper, Rebecca declared. When's the wedding? We haven't talked about timing yet. Emma has very strong opinions about being the flower girl, but beyond that we haven't made any concrete plans. The truth was, Sarah felt slightly overwhelmed by the idea of planning a wedding. Having never had a traditional family, she wasn't sure what she wanted in terms of ceremony and celebration. Her foster care experience hadn't included lessons in wedding planning or dreams of white dresses and church ceremonies. That evening, as they sat around Mike's kitchen table, sharing takeout Chinese food and discussing their engagement, Sarah voiced her uncertainties. I don't really know what I want for a wedding, she admitted. I've never thought much about it before. I don't have a big family to invite or traditions to follow. What do you want it to feel like? Mike asked, setting down his chopsticks to focus on her completely. Sarah considered the question. I want it to feel like us. Like family. I want Emma to be excited and involved, and I want it to celebrate what we're building together, rather than what I never had growing up. So we make it about us, Mike said simply. Small and meaningful instead of big and traditional. Can we have it in our backyard? Emma asked, looking up from her lo mein. With lights in the trees and cake that doesn't have coconut because coconut is gross. Our backyard sounds perfect, Sarah agreed, reaching across the table to squeeze Emma's hand. And definitely no coconut. Over the next few weeks, their wedding plans took shape organically. They decided on a June ceremony, just 6 weeks away in Mike's backyard with their closest friends and family. Emma threw herself into flower girl preparations with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been waiting her entire life for this opportunity. "I need to practice walking slowly," she announced, pacing up and down the hallway with exaggerated steps. "Aunt Rebecca says flower girls who walk too fast ruin the whole thing." Sarah found herself touched by how naturally their small community rallied around their engagement. Mike's sister Rebecca immediately claimed maid of honor duties and began organizing details with military precision. The librarians threw Sarah a small engagement party during lunch break, complete with cake and terrible wedding-themed jokes. Even Emma's teacher sent home a note of congratulations and offered to help with any child-friendly wedding preparations. The only shadow on their happiness came from an unexpected source, Jennifer's parents. David and Carol Bennett had remained part of Emma's life since their daughter's death, taking her for weekend visits and maintaining their connection as her grandparents. Mike had always been careful to include them in Emma's milestones and to honor their role in her life. But when Emma mentioned during a phone call that Daddy was getting married, their response was less than enthusiastic. "We'd like to meet her," Carol said when she called Mike later that evening. "This Sarah person who's going to be Emma's stepmother." The emphasis on stepmother carried a weight that made Mike's chest tighten with familiar anxiety. He'd known this conversation would come eventually, but he'd hoped for more time to establish Sarah's place in their lives before having to defend it. "Of course," Mike replied carefully. "We'd love for you to meet Sarah. She's wonderful with Emma, and Emma adores her." "I'm sure she's very nice," David said. When Mike arranged a dinner meeting for the following week, "But Emma barely remembers her mother as it is. We want to make sure this new woman understands her place." Mike felt his jaw clench at the implication. Sarah understands perfectly that Jennifer was Emma's mother and that nothing will change that. But she's also going to be Emma's stepmother, which means she'll have an important role in Emma's life. The dinner meeting took place at a neutral restaurant, and the tension was immediately palpable. David and Carol Bennett were cordial but cool, asking Sarah questions that felt more like an interrogation than a conversation. "What experience do you have with children?" Carol asked her tone, suggesting that working with kids at a library somehow didn't qualify as real experience. "How do you plan to honor Jennifer's memory?" David added, making Sarah feel like she was applying for a job rather than joining a family. Throughout the awkward meal, Emma remained blissfully unaware of the undercurrents, chattering happily to her grandparents about Sarah's work at the library and their wedding plans. "Sarah's going to help me with my magic show for the end-of-school party," Emma announced proudly. "She's really good at helping me practice, and she never gets bored when I do the same trick over and over." Sarah watched Carol's face soften slightly at Emma's obvious affection, but David remained skeptical. "Emma, why don't you go wash your hands before dessert?" Mike suggested, recognizing that the adults needed to have a direct conversation without little ears listening. Once Emma was out of earshot, David leaned forward with the kind of intensity that made Mike's protective instincts flare. "Mike, we're not trying to be difficult, but Jennifer was our only child and Emma is our only grandchild. We've lost so much already. We can't lose Emma too." "You're not losing Emma," Sarah said gently, speaking for the first time since the interrogation began. "I'm not trying to replace Jennifer or take Emma away from anyone who loves her. I just want to love her too." "It's not that simple," Carol replied. "Emma is already forgetting her mother. If she starts calling you Mom, I would never ask her to call me Mom unless she chose to." Sarah interrupted. "And even if she did, that wouldn't erase Jennifer. Children are capable of loving multiple people in different ways." The conversation continued for another uncomfortable hour with Mike, growing increasingly frustrated by his in-laws' inability to see Sarah as anything other than a threat to their daughter's memory. Later that night, after Emma was asleep and Sarah had gone home to her apartment, Mike called Jennifer's parents to have a more direct conversation. David Carroll, I understand your concerns, but I need you to understand something too. Sarah makes me happy, and she makes Emma happy. After 3 years of grief and loneliness, we've found joy again. Jennifer would want that for us. Would she? Carol's voice was sharp with pain. Or would she want Emma to remember her mother instead of replacing her with some stranger? Sarah isn't replacing anyone, Mike said firmly. Jennifer will always be Emma's first mother, always be part of our family story. But that doesn't mean there isn't room for Sarah, too. The conversation ended without resolution, leaving Mike worried about how their disapproval might affect Emma and their wedding plans. When he shared his concerns with Sarah the next day, she listened with the patient understanding that had drawn him to her from the beginning. They're afraid, she said simply. They've lost their daughter, and now they're afraid of losing their connection to her through Emma. I can't take that fear away, but I can show them that I'm not their enemy. You shouldn't have to prove yourself to anyone, Mike protested. Maybe not, but Emma loves her grandparents and you respect them. If showing them that I care about honoring Jennifer's memory helps our family be whole, then it's worth the effort. Her willingness to be patient with people who were essentially rejecting her, her ability to see their fear rather than their hostility, reminded Mike again why he'd fallen in love with this remarkable woman. As their wedding date approached, the conflict with Jennifer's parents remained unresolved, but Mike and Sarah chose to focus on the positive aspects of their celebration. Their love was real, their family was strong, and their future was bright. Not everyone would understand or approve, but the people who mattered most were excited to celebrate with them. Are you nervous? Sarah asked Mike the night before their wedding. As they sat on his back porch looking at the lights Rebecca had strung through the trees earlier that day. Not about marrying you, Mike replied honestly. About whether we're doing everything right, maybe. About whether Emma will look back on this day and remember it fondly. About whether I'm honoring Jennifer's memory while still moving forward. Sarah took his hand, her engagement ring catching the light from the string bulbs overhead. Mike, love doesn't diminish love. Emma gets to keep everything she had with her first mum and gain everything she'll have with me. That's not betrayal, that's abundance. How did you get so wise? I learned from the best. A man who held out his hand to a muddy stranger and taught me that showing up is the most important thing you can do for someone you love. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of their neighborhood and marveling at how far they'd come since that disastrous first date 8 months ago. Tomorrow, they would be married, officially binding together the family they'd already created through choice and patience and love. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Sarah woke up on her wedding day to sunshine streaming through the windows of her apartment and the sound of her phone buzzing with congratulatory text messages. For a moment she lay in bed feeling surreal about the day ahead. In a few hours she would be Mrs. Mike Harrison, Emma's stepmother, part of a family she'd never dared to dream she could have. The morning passed in a blur of preparation and excitement. Rebecca arrived with coffee and pastries, followed by Emma, who was practically vibrating with flower girl anticipation. They'd set up a getting-ready station in Sarah's living room, complete with mirrors, curling irons, and enough beauty products to supply a salon. Today's the day, Emma announced, twirling around in her underwear and fairy wings, the flower girl dress hanging carefully on the bedroom door. I get to scatter petals and walk really slowly, and everyone will watch me be the best flower girl ever. You're going to be amazing, Sarah assured her, sitting still, while Rebecca worked magic with a curling iron. Just remember to take your time and enjoy every moment. Sarah had chosen a simple but elegant dress, cream-colored silk, that flattered her figure without being overly formal. It was the kind of dress that said, bride without screaming wedding perfect for a backyard ceremony, that prioritized meaning over pageantry. You look beautiful, Rebecca said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. Mike is going to cry when he sees you. I hope so, Sarah replied, feeling tears threaten her own carefully applied makeup. Happy tears only today. Emma appeared beside her now, dressed in her flower girl outfit, a dusty rose dress that complemented the garden theme, with a crown of baby's breath in her hair that made her look like a fairy princess. We match you, Emma observed, comparing their cream and rose color scheme. We look like we belong together. The simple observation hit Sarah unexpectedly hard. They did look like they belonged together, this little girl who'd welcomed her into their family, and this woman who'd never expected to be anyone's stepmom. We do belong together, Sarah agreed, pulling Emma into a careful hug that wouldn't disturb either of their hairstyles. Forever and always. Meanwhile, across town, Mike was having his own getting ready experience with his brother-in-law Tom and his best friend Jake. The three men had gathered at the house early to set up the last-minute details and help Mike get into his suit without having a nervous breakdown. You sure about this man? Jake teased as he helped adjust Mike's tie. Last chance to run away and join the circus. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, Mike replied, checking his appearance in the mirror. He looked good in his charcoal grey suit, nervous but happy, ready to make promises he intended to keep forever. The backyard had been transformed overnight into something magical. Rebecca had supervised the installation of white chairs arranged in rows facing the garden, with a simple arch made of birch branches and trailing jasmine marking the spot where Mike and Sarah would exchange vows. String lights twinkled in the trees, and mason jars filled with wild flowers from the farmer's market sat on shepherd's hooks along the aisle. It was exactly what they'd envisioned, intimate, personal, beautiful in its simplicity. Guests began arriving at 4 o'clock, the small group of family and friends who'd witnessed their love story unfold over the past months. Mike's parents had flown in from Arizona, looking proud and emotional as they hugged their son and prepared to welcome a new daughter-in-law. Sarah's former foster parents, the Johnsons, had driven up from Eugene, representing the closest thing to family she had from her childhood. The most meaningful arrival was David and Carol Bennett, who'd ultimately decided to attend despite their reservations. Emma had run to hug her grandparents, chattering excitedly about her flower girl duties, and their obvious love for her seemed to soften some of their earlier resistance. She looks happy, Carol observed, watching Emma practice her petal-scattering technique for the 10th time. She is happy, Mike replied. We all are. At 5 o'clock, with golden afternoon light filtering through the trees, the ceremony began. Jake, who'd gotten ordained online specifically for this occasion, took his place under the arch. Mike walked out of the house with Emma by his side, both of them beaming as they faced their small audience of loved ones. Then Sarah appeared in the back door of the house, and Mike's breath caught. She was radiant in her simple dress, carrying a bouquet of garden roses and baby's breath. Her auburn hair styled in soft waves that caught the light. But it was her smile that undid him completely. Pure joy, excitement, and love directed straight at him and Emma. Emma walked down the aisle first, taking her flower girl duties very seriously as she scattered rose petals with careful precision. When she reached the front, she gave Mike a big thumbs up that made everyone laugh. Then Sarah made her walk down the aisle, and Mike felt tears start despite his best efforts to maintain composure. This woman who'd entered his life covered in mud and transformed everything was about to become his wife. Emma's stepmother, the missing piece of their family. When Sarah reached him, Mike took her hands and whispered, "You're beautiful." "So are you," she whispered back, and Emma giggled at their obvious emotion. Jake began the ceremony with words about love that endures, about families formed by choice, about the courage it takes to open your heart again after loss. Then it was time for their personal vows. Mike went first, his voice steady, despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. Sarah, when you showed up to our first date covered in mud, I thought the evening was ruined. I had no idea it was actually the beginning of everything good in my life. He paused, looking at Emma, then back at Sarah. You've taught me that love doesn't replace love, it multiplies it. That there's room in our hearts for honoring what was while embracing what is. You've shown Emma that she can love you completely while still loving her first mum, and you've shown me that happiness after loss isn't a betrayal. It's a celebration. His voice grew stronger as he continued. I promise to choose you every day in the easy moments and the difficult ones. I promise to support your dreams, to laugh at your terrible jokes, and to always remember that you're not just my wife, you're Emma's mom by choice, which makes you the most important person in our world. I promise to love you with everything I have for all the days of our lives. Sarah was crying openly now, not caring about her makeup as she began her own vows. Mike, you saved me in more ways than you know. Not just from a muddy puddle, but from a life where I believed I wasn't worth choosing. You and Emma chose me again and again until I learned to choose myself. She looked at Emma, including her in the vows. You taught me what family really means. It's not about biology or perfection. It's about showing up, about choosing each other every day, about building something beautiful from ordinary moments. She turned back to Mike, her voice growing stronger. I promise to love you and Emma with everything I have. I promise to honor Jennifer's memory while building our own. I promise to be patient when life gets messy, to celebrate every small victory, to read bedtime stories with all the right voices, and to always remember that love is a verb, not just a feeling. I promise to show up for both of you forever and always. When Jake pronounced them husband and wife and invited Mike to kiss his bride, the small gathering erupted in cheers. Emma threw herself at both of them, wrapping her arms around their legs in a fierce hug that nearly toppled all three of them. We did it, Emma shouted. We're married. We're a real official family. We were already a real family, Sarah said, kneeling down to Emma's level. Now it's just official. The reception was everything their wedding had been. Small, intimate, and perfect. Tables covered in white linens were scattered around the backyard, each one decorated with mason jars of wildflowers and battery-operated tea lights. Mike's neighbor had volunteered to grill, filling the air with the smell of barbecue and the sound of laughter. During dinner, Rebecca stood to give a toast that had everyone laughing and crying in equal measure. When Mike told me about his disastrous first date with a woman who showed up covered in mud, I thought, well, that's it. He's going to cancel and become a hermit. But he didn't, because my brother has always had a gift for seeing what really matters. She raised her glass toward Sarah. And Sarah, you matter. You've always mattered. You've brought joy back into this house, laughter back into Emma's life, and hope back into Mike's heart. Thank you for showing up, muddy dress and all. Emma had insisted on giving her own toast, standing on her chair to address the crowd with 7-year-old confidence. I just want to say that Sarah is the best almost mum ever, and now she's my real mum, and I'm really happy about that. Also, she promised we could get a dog next year, so this has been the best day ever. The crowd laughed as Mike looked at Sarah with mock accusation. Did you really promise her a dog, I might have mentioned? It was a possibility, Sarah admitted, grinning. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Mike and Sarah found themselves alone in their backyard, surrounded by the remnants of their perfect day. Emma had crashed hours ago, carried inside by her grandparents and tucked into bed with her flower crown still slightly askew on her head. We did it, Sarah said, leaning against Mike as they swayed slowly to music from the small speaker they'd set up for dancing. We're married. Best decision I ever made, Mike replied, spinning her gently. Well, second best. First was deciding to help a muddy stranger instead of running away. What happens now? Sarah asked, not because she was worried about their future, but because she was so happy in the present moment that she wanted to savor it. Now we go on our honeymoon to the Oregon coast. We come home to our family and we live happily ever after. Mike said simply. It's going to be wonderful and ordinary and sometimes difficult and always worth it. As they danced under the string lights surrounded by the garden they'd created and the home they'd built together, Sarah felt a peace settle in her chest that she'd never experienced before. This was what belonging felt like. This was what home meant. They were married officially and completely. Sarah Harrison, wife and stepmother, part of a family that had chosen her as much as she'd chosen them. The honeymoon was everything Mike and Sarah had hoped it would be. 3 days at a cozy bed and breakfast on the Oregon coast, sleeping late, taking long walks on the beach, and marveling at the fact that they were actually married. Emma had stayed with Mike's parents, who'd extended their visit specifically to give the newlyweds some alone time. "I can't believe she's really ours," Sarah said, on their last morning sitting on the deck of their room overlooking the Pacific Ocean. "I keep waiting for someone to tell me it was all a mistake." "It's real," Mike assured her, pulling her closer on the small love seat. "You're stuck with us now, Mrs. Harrison." "Mrs. Harrison," Sarah repeated, testing out the sound of her married name. "I like it." They returned to Portland and regular life with the contented exhaustion of people who'd celebrated well and were ready to begin their next chapter. Emma greeted them with drawings she'd made of their wedding and detailed reports of all the fun she'd had with her grandparents. "Grandma Carol taught me how to make French toast," Emma announced proudly. "And Grandpa David helped me practice my card tricks. They said I was the best flower girl they'd ever seen." Mike and Sarah exchanged a look of relief. Jennifer's parents had clearly made an effort to embrace their new reality, and their obvious love for Emma seemed to be helping them accept Sarah's place in the family. The first few weeks of married life fell into an easy rhythm. Sarah officially moved into Mike's house, combining their belongings and creating space for her books and personal items among his and Emma's. They established new routines that honored their individual needs while building their life as a married couple. Sarah kept her job at the library, but her hours became more flexible as she prioritized being home when Emma got out of school. Mike took on fewer evening meetings, wanting to be present for family dinners and bedtime routines. They were learning to be partners in parenting, supporting each other's decisions while maintaining consistency for Emma. "I like having you here all the time," Emma announced one evening as Sarah helped her with homework while Mike made dinner. "It feels more like a real family now. We were always a real family," Sarah reminded her gently. "Now we just all live in the same house. I know, but it's better this way. More cozy." 2 months into their marriage, Sarah began to notice changes in her body that seemed unusual, but not immediately alarming. She was more tired than normal, falling asleep during their nightly reading time with Emma, and struggling to get up early for work. Her appetite shifted with foods she usually loved, suddenly seeming unappealing. At first, she attributed the symptoms to the stress of adjusting to married life and new routines. But when she missed her period, and then realized she'd missed the previous one too, a possibility occurred to her that left her reeling. Sarah stared at the pregnancy test in the library bathroom during her lunch break, watching 2 pink lines appear and feeling the world shift around her. Pregnant. She was pregnant with Mike's baby, something they'd discussed in abstract terms, but hadn't actively been trying to achieve. Her first emotion was pure joy, followed immediately by terror. What if Mike wasn't ready for another child? What if Emma felt replaced or forgotten? What if Sarah wasn't capable of being pregnant and raising a child while also being Emma's stepmother? She spent the rest of the workday in a daze, mechanically processing book returns and answering patron questions while her mind raced with implications and possibilities. By the time she got home, she'd decided to wait for the right moment to tell Mike, not wanting to burden him with her news until she'd processed it herself. But Emma noticed her distraction immediately. "Are you okay?" Emma asked during dinner. studying Sarah's face with the perceptive attention that made her such an insightful child. "You look different." "I'm fine, sweetheart," Sarah replied, forcing herself to focus on the conversation. "Just thinking about work stuff. Boring work stuff or interesting work stuff?" "Definitely boring," Sarah said, making Emma giggle. That night, as they got ready for bed, Mike noticed her unusual quiet. "Everything okay?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind as she brushed her teeth. "You seem preoccupied." Sarah met his eyes in the bathroom mirror, and for a moment she almost told him everything. But something held her back. Fear, maybe, or the desire to be absolutely certain before changing their lives again. "Just tired," she said finally. "It's been a busy week at the library." Over the next few days, Sarah made a doctor's appointment to confirm the pregnancy and get advice about next steps. Dr. Martinez was enthusiastic and reassuring, estimating that Sarah was about 10 weeks along and that everything looked healthy and normal. "Based on your last period, you'd be due in early March," Dr. Martinez said, showing Sarah the ultrasound image of a tiny blob that would become her child. "Do you and your husband want to start thinking about whether you'd like to know the gender I need to tell him first?" Sarah admitted. "This is kind of a surprise." "Good surprises are the best kind," Dr. Martinez said with a smile. "Congratulations, Sarah. You're going to be a wonderful mother." As Sarah drove home from the appointment, ultrasound photos tucked carefully in her purse, she finally allowed herself to feel excited about the pregnancy. She was going to have a baby with Mike. Emma was going to be a big sister. Their family was growing in the most wonderful way possible. Now she just had to find the courage to share the news. The opportunity came sooner than expected. That evening, Mike was assembling a new bookshelf for Emma's room, while Sarah helped Emma organize her expanding collection of chapter books. The domestic scene was so perfectly ordinary that it gave Sarah the courage she'd been lacking. "Emma, can you go wash your hands for dinner?" Sarah asked suddenly, needing a moment alone with Mike. "But I want to help Daddy with the bookshelf," Emma protested. After dinner, Mike promised. "Go wash up, kiddo." When Emma's footsteps disappeared down the hallway, Sarah took a deep breath and approached Mike, who was kneeling on the floor surrounded by bookshelf pieces and instruction manuals. "Mike, I need to tell you something." Something in her tone made him look up immediately, his expression shifting from casual to concerned. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," Sarah said quickly, then reconsidered. "Actually, something's different. Something that's going to change things for us." Mike set down his screwdriver and gave her his full attention. "Sarah, you're scaring me. What's going on?" Instead of trying to find the perfect words, Sarah pulled the ultrasound photo from her pocket and handed it to him. Mike stared at the black and white image for a long moment, his brain clearly processing what he was seeing. "Is this... I'm pregnant," Sarah said the words finally out in the open. "About 10 weeks. The baby's due in March." Mike's face went through a series of expressions: shock, wonder, joy, and something that might have been fear. He stood up slowly, still holding the ultrasound photo like it was made of something precious and fragile. "We're having a baby," he said, as if testing the words. "We're having a baby," Sarah confirmed, watching his face carefully for his true reaction. "Sarah," Mike breathed, and then he was pulling her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "We're having a baby? Holy shit, we're having a baby!" "Language." Sarah laughed, relief flooding through her at his obvious joy. "Sorry, but holy shit, Sarah, this is incredible. Are you okay? How do you feel? When did you find out?" The questions tumbled out of him as he pulled back to look at her face, his hands gentle on her shoulders. Sarah could see tears in his eyes, and her own throat tightened with emotion. "I'm okay. A little tired, but okay. I found out this week and had it confirmed today. I wanted to be sure before I told you. Are you happy about it?" Mike asked, suddenly vulnerable. I know we talked about having children, but this is happening pretty fast. I'm terrified and thrilled and completely overwhelmed, Sarah admitted. But yes, I'm happy. Are you? I'm over the moon, Mike said, kissing her softly. Emma's going to flip out. She's been asking about a baby brother or sister since before we got married. Speaking of Emma, we should probably tell her soon. I don't want her to overhear us talking about it. Tell me what Emma's voice came from the doorway where she'd apparently been eavesdropping instead of washing her hands. Mike and Sarah exchanged a look. Then Mike gestured for Emma to come join them. We have some news, sweetheart, Sarah said, pulling Emma onto her lap. Something exciting? Are we getting a dog? Emma asked hopefully. Better than a dog, Mike said, grinning. How would you feel about being a big sister? Emma's eyes went wide as she processed the information. You mean Sarah has a baby in her tummy? That's exactly what I mean, Sarah confirmed, watching Emma's face carefully for her reaction. For a moment, Emma was completely still. Then she launched herself at Sarah with such enthusiasm that Mike had to steady them both. I'm going to be a big sister, Emma shouted. I'm going to teach them everything. How to do magic tricks, and how to read, and how to make the perfect peanut butter sandwich. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as Emma's excitement filled the room. This little girl who'd already accepted her as family was now embracing the idea of a new sibling with the same open-hearted enthusiasm she brought to everything. Can we tell everyone? Emma asked, bouncing on Sarah's lap. Can we call Aunt Rebecca? Can we tell my grandparents? Can we start getting ready for the baby right now? We can tell everyone, Mike confirmed, wrapping his arms around both his girls. But first, we need to eat dinner and finish building your bookshelf. The bookshelf can wait, Emma declared. This is way more important than organizing books. As Mike called his sister to share the news and Emma chatted about baby names and nursery colors, Sarah sat in the midst of their joyful chaos and marveled at how dramatically her life had changed in the span of 18 months. From a muddy disaster of a first date to married mother-to-be, from woman without family to the center of a growing household full of love. It was more than she'd ever dared to dream, and it was all real. That night, after Emma had finally been convinced to go to bed, despite her excitement, Mike and Sarah lay in their own bed talking about the future. I can't believe we're going to have a baby, Mike said, his hand resting gently on Sarah's still flat stomach. Emma's going to be such an amazing big sister. She really is, Sarah agreed. I was worried about how she'd react, but I should have known better. She has such a generous heart. She gets that from her mom, Mike said softly. Both of them. The comment could have been painful, a reminder that Sarah wasn't Emma's only mother figure. Instead, it felt like inclusion recognition that Sarah had earned her place in their family constellation alongside Jennifer's memory. I love you, Sarah said, turning to face Mike in the darkness. All of you. This whole beautiful, complicated, wonderful family we've built. I love you too, Mike replied, kissing her forehead. All of us, including this little one who's going to make our family even more complete. As Sarah drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, listening to Emma's soft breathing from the room next door and feeling the earliest flutter of new life growing inside her, she felt a contentment deeper than any she'd ever known. Their love story had begun with mud and mishap, built itself on patience and choice, and now was expanding in the most miraculous way. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together as the family they'd chosen to become. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the same spot where she'd first fallen into the mud puddle, but now she was 7 months pregnant and glowing with the kind of happiness that came from knowing exactly where you belonged in the world. Emma held her hand as they waited for Mike to finish his meeting at the architecture firm. Across the street, their Friday afternoon routine of walking to pick up Daddy from work, one of many small traditions that had developed since their wedding. Do you think the baby can hear me when I talk to your tummy? Emma asked, pressing her face close to Sarah's rounded belly. I'm sure they can, Sarah replied, running her fingers through Emma's hair. "The doctor says babies can hear sounds from outside starting around this time." "Good, because I've been telling them all about our family and how excited we are to meet them. And I've been practicing my magic tricks so I can teach them as soon as they're old enough." Sarah smiled, marveling at how naturally Emma had embraced her role as big sister-to-be. At 8 years old, Emma had thrown herself into baby preparation with characteristic enthusiasm, helping to set up the nursery reading pregnancy books designed for children and talking to Sarah's belly every morning before school. "What story should I tell them today?" Emma asked, settling into their usual bench to wait for Mike. "Tell them about the day we met," Sarah suggested. "About how Daddy and I fell in love, and how you became my daughter." As Emma launched into her version of their family origin story, complete with dramatic gestures and sound effects, Sarah reflected on how much their lives had changed since that muddy evening 18 months ago. The woman who'd once been afraid she'd never find a family of her own was now married to her best friend, stepmother, to the most wonderful little girl in the world, and about to welcome a baby who would complete their circle. The pregnancy had been smooth and uncomplicated, filled with milestones and moments that had brought them even closer together as a family. Emma had accompanied them to ultrasound appointments, insisting she needed to see her siblings' progress for herself. Mike had painted the nursery a soft sage green that would work for either a boy or girl, with Emma contributing handmade decorations and a mobile she'd created from her art supplies. They'd decided not to find out the baby's gender, wanting to be surprised. Emma had strong opinions about both possibilities. "If it's a girl, we should name her Luna because that's magical, and if it's a boy, we should name him Atlas because that's strong," while Mike and Sarah favored more traditional options. "There he is," Emma announced, spotting Mike emerging from his office building. She jumped up to wave enthusiastically, and Mike's face lit up with the smile that was reserved specifically for his family. "How are my girls today?" he asked, kissing Sarah and ruffling Emma's hair. "We're good, but the baby's been really active," Sarah replied, taking Mike's hand and placing it on her belly. Almost immediately, their son or daughter responded with a strong kick that made Mike's eyes widen with wonder. "Still amazing," he said, the awe in his voice the same as it had been the first time he'd felt the baby move 3 months ago. Every single time. They walked home through their neighborhood, Emma skipping ahead, while Mike and Sarah followed at a more sedate pace, necessitated by Sarah's growing belly and occasional discomfort. The October air was crisp and clear, carrying the smell of wood smoke and fallen leaves that made Portland autumn so magical. "I got a call from Dr. Martinez today," Sarah said as they turned onto their street. "Everything looks perfect at this week's appointment. The baby should be here right on schedule in March. Perfect timing for spring break," Mike replied. "I can take 2 weeks off to help at home, and Emma will be on vacation from school to meet her new sibling." "Speaking of Emma," Sarah said, lowering her voice so the little girl couldn't overhear, "I think we need to prepare her for the reality of having a newborn in the house. She's so excited, but babies cry a lot and need constant attention." "Good point. Maybe we should have her spend some time with Rebecca's baby so she gets a realistic picture." Rebecca had given birth to her first child, a daughter named Sophia, just 2 months after Mike and Sarah's wedding. Emma had been fascinated by her tiny cousin, but hadn't spent enough time around her to understand the full reality of infant care. That weekend, they arranged for Emma to spend Saturday afternoon with Rebecca and Sophia, ostensibly to help with babysitting, but really to give Emma a chance to see what life with a newborn actually entailed. Emma returned home that evening with a more subdued but still enthusiastic attitude about becoming a big sister. "Sophia cries a lot," she reported to Sarah and Mike over dinner, "and she can't do anything fun yet. But Aunt Rebecca says she'll get more interesting when she's older, and that being a big sister is the best job in the world because you get to teach them everything." "That's very true," Sarah agreed. "Are you still excited about our baby?" "Super excited," Emma confirmed. but I think we might need to baby-proof my magic supplies so they don't try to eat the cards or coins." Mike and Sarah exchanged amused glances. Emma was clearly taking her protective big sister duties seriously. As Sarah's due date approached, their household settled into new routines designed around preparing for their expanding family. They moved Emma's bedroom to the larger room down the hall, giving her space for a reading nook and play area that would be important when she needed quiet space away from a crying baby. Mike converted his home office into a nursery, revealing a talent for interior design that rivaled his architectural skills. The room was warm and welcoming, with hand-painted murals of storybook characters and a rocking chair positioned to catch the morning light streaming through the large windows. "It's perfect," Sarah said, standing in the doorway at 36 weeks pregnant and feeling emotional about everything. "Our baby is so lucky to have you for a dad. Our baby is lucky to have all of us," Mike replied, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his hands on her belly. "Emma's going to be the best big sister, you're going to be an amazing mum, and I'm going to try not to mess anything up too badly." "You're not going to mess anything up," Sarah assured him. "You're already an incredible father." The baby chose to arrive 2 weeks early on a snowy February morning that transformed Portland into a winter wonderland. Sarah woke up at 5 a.m. with contractions that were too regular to ignore, and by 7 they were at the hospital with Emma in tow, since Mike's parents hadn't arrived yet for their planned visit. "Is it happening now?" Emma asked, clutching her overnight bag and looking both excited and nervous. "It's happening now," Sarah confirmed, pausing as another contraction hit. "Your baby brother or sister decided they didn't want to wait any longer." Labor progressed quickly, and by noon, James Michael Harrison made his entrance into the world, screaming with the indignation of someone who'd been comfortable where he was and didn't appreciate being evicted. "It's a boy," Mike announced, tears streaming down his face as he held his son for the first time. "Emma, you have a baby brother." Emma stood on tiptoes to peer into the bundle Mike was holding, her eyes wide with wonder. "He's so little," she whispered, "and so red." "All babies are red at first," Sarah explained from the hospital bed. "Exhausted but euphoric. He'll look more like a regular person in a few days. Can I hold him?" Mike helped Emma settle into the chair beside Sarah's bed and carefully placed James in his big sister's arms. Emma's face transformed with an expression of such pure love and protectiveness that both Mike and Sarah started crying all over again. "Hi, James," Emma said softly, her voice taking on the gentle tone she used with small animals and young children at the library. "I'm your big sister, Emma, and I've been waiting to meet you for months. I have so many things to teach you." James stopped crying and seemed to focus on Emma's voice, his tiny hand waving in the air until Emma offered her finger, which he grasped with surprising strength. "He likes me," Emma said with satisfaction. "I think we're going to be best friends." The first few weeks at home with a newborn were everything they'd expected and nothing like what they'd imagined. James was a good baby overall, but he still required round-the-clock care that left everyone operating on minimal sleep and maximum love. Emma rose to the challenge of big sisterhood with maturity that amazed her parents. She helped with diaper changes, entertained James with magic tricks during his alert periods, and never complained when family activities had to be postponed due to feeding schedules or crying episodes. "Emma's been incredible through all this," Sarah told Mike one evening, as they collapsed on the couch after finally getting James settled for what they hoped would be a few hours of sleep. "She really has. I think having a sibling is bringing out her best instincts." "Speaking of siblings," Sarah said, curling up against Mike's side, "I can't believe how much I love him already. I know it sounds silly, but I was worried I wouldn't know how to love a biological child after falling in love with Emma first." "It doesn't sound silly at all," Mike assured her. "But you're a natural mother, Sarah. You were meant for this. How do you know?" Because Emma lights up when you're here. Because she talks about you at school and asks for you when you're not around. Because she made you a photo album and spent 3 hours arranging the pictures in the exact right order. He kissed her temple softly. Because you belong here, and we both feel it. 3 months later, as spring arrived in Portland, with its usual explosion of cherry blossoms and daffodils, the Harrison family had settled into a rhythm that worked for all 4 of them. James was sleeping through the night. Emma had mastered the art of being helpful without being overwhelming, and Mike and Sarah were remembering what it felt like to be human again. On a warm April afternoon, they decided to take their first family outing to the farmer's market, the place where Mike had proposed, and where so many of their important conversations had taken place. Sarah pushed James in his stroller, while Mike and Emma walked ahead, debating the merits of various spring vegetables. James was awake and alert, taking in all the sights and sounds with the serious expression he'd inherited from his father. "Look how far we've come," Sarah said to Mike as they paused at the flower vendor where they'd bought tulips on the day he'd proposed. "A year ago, I was just your fiancé. Now I'm your wife and the mother of your children." "Both of my children," Mike corrected gently, including Emma in the statement. "Biology doesn't make you more or less their mom, Sarah. Love makes you their mom." As they walked through the market, surrounded by the bustle of Saturday morning shoppers and the abundance of spring produce, Sarah felt the same deep contentment she'd experienced on their wedding day. This was what happiness looked like, ordinary moments shared with the people who mattered most, building a life together one day at a time. "Ice cream?" Emma asked hopefully as they passed their favorite vendor. "It's 10 in the morning," Mike protested automatically. "But it's Saturday," Emma countered with 8-year-old logic. "And we're celebrating being a complete family." Sarah and Mike looked at each other, then at James sleeping peacefully in his stroller, then at Emma's hopeful face. "Saturday rules," they said in unison, making Emma cheer with delight. As they sat on their favorite bench, sharing ice cream cones and watching the world go by, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a muddy disaster of a first date to this perfect spring morning with her husband and children, the path had been unexpected, but absolutely right. 2 years after that snowy February day when James entered the world, the Harrison family had grown into their roles with the comfort that comes from daily practice of love. Emma, now 10, had become the big sister she'd always dreamed of being, teaching James to walk to say his first words and to appreciate the finer points of magic tricks performed by a determined older sister. James at 2 was a perfect blend of his parents' best qualities: Mike's steady temperament and Sarah's curiosity about the world, with an added dash of Emma's enthusiasm for life. He followed his sister everywhere, mimicking her movements and hanging on her every word with the devoted attention that only little siblings can provide. On a crisp October morning, Sarah stood in the exact spot where her life had changed forever. But this time she was holding James while Emma practiced her latest magic routine for a group of passing tourists. They were waiting for Mike to finish his Saturday morning meeting, their weekend tradition of farmers' market visits, now including a small boy who had strong opinions about which apples were worth buying. "Mama, watch," James demanded, pointing at Emma with the imperious tone of a 2-year-old who expected the world to revolve around his entertainment needs. "I'm watching," baby Sarah assured him, settling him more comfortably on her hip. At 31, she felt like she'd grown into motherhood, as naturally as breathing the fears and uncertainties of early parenthood, replaced by the confident competence that came from daily practice. Emma finished her performance to enthusiastic applause from their small audience, taking her bows with the theatrical flair that had become her signature. She'd grown into a confident, articulate child who moved through the world with the security that came from knowing she was unconditionally loved by multiple adults. "How was that?" she asked, bounding over to Sarah and James, with her face flushed from excitement. "Perfect as always," Sarah replied. watching James clap his hands in appreciation of his sister's skills. Though I think James liked the disappearing coin trick best. Coin James announced, having learned that his opinions carried weight in this family, and that expressing them loudly got the best results. I'll teach it to you when you're older, Emma promised him seriously. But first you need to learn to keep secrets, and 2-year-olds are terrible at keeping secrets. Mike emerged from his office building across the street, and James immediately began bouncing in Sarah's arms with excitement. "Da-da, da-da!" "There's my boy Mike," called back, jogging across the street to join them. He swept James into a bear hug that made the little boy shriek with laughter, then kissed Sarah and ruffled Emma's hair in greeting. "How was the meeting?" Sarah asked as they began their walk home through the neighborhood that had become so familiar and beloved. "Good. The Hendersons approved the final plans for their addition, so we'll break ground next month." Mike shifted James to his shoulders, giving the little boy a better view of the world while freeing Sarah's arms. "That's the house with the reading nook built into the kitchen island," Emma asked, having learned to follow her father's projects with interest. "That's the one. They have a daughter about James's age who loves books, so they wanted a cozy space where she could read while they cook, just like how you built my reading corner," Emma said with satisfaction. "You're the best architect dad ever." As they walked through their tree-lined neighborhood, passing houses Mike had designed and renovated over the years, Sarah reflected on how their individual gifts had combined to create something larger than the sum of its parts. Mike's talent for creating spaces where families could flourish, Emma's gift for bringing joy and magic into every day, her own passion for fostering literacy and learning in children, and now James's infectious enthusiasm for life. Together, they were building something meaningful that extended beyond their own family. The library programs Sarah had developed were now used as models by other branches throughout the city. Mike's residential designs prioritized family spaces and accessibility, creating homes where people could age in place and children could grow safely. Emma's confidence and kindness made her a natural leader among her peers, someone other children looked to for guidance and friendship. "I got a call from Rebecca today," Sarah said as they turned onto their street. "She wants to bring Sophia over next weekend for a play date with James." "James would love that," Mike replied. "He's been asking about Sophie all week." Their extended family had grown over the past few years to include not just biological relatives, but the chosen family they'd created through friendship and community. Rebecca's daughter Sophia was James's favorite cousin, despite the age difference. Jennifer's parents had become doting grandparents to both Emma and James, their earlier reservations about Sarah completely dissolved by time and evidence of her love for their granddaughter. The network of support surrounding their family was something Sarah never took for granted. Having grown up without extended family, she marveled daily at the abundance of love and help available to her children. Teachers who knew them by name, neighbors who watched out for them, friends who celebrated their milestones and supported them through challenges. "Sarah," a voice called from across the street. It was Mrs. Chen, their elderly neighbor who had become an honorary grandmother to both children. "How's our little magician?" Emma waved enthusiastically, while James called out Ms. Chen in his toddler approximation of her name. "She wants to teach Emma how to knit," Sarah told Mike. "Apparently it builds fine motor skills and patience." "Emma could use more patience," Mike observed, watching their daughter attempt to climb a tree while still wearing her good shoes. "She's 10, Sarah reminded him. "Patience comes with age and practice." "Like love," Mike said, taking Sarah's hand as they approached their house. "Remember when we thought love was something that happened to you? Now I know it's something you choose to do every single day." That evening, after James was asleep and Emma was reading in her room, Mike and Sarah sat on their back porch with cups of tea and the comfortable exhaustion that came from a full day of family life. "Do you ever think about that night at the Bluebird Cafe?" Sarah asked, settling into the swing Mike had hung from the pergola beams the previous summer. All the time, Mike admitted. I think about how easily I could have walked away. How many small choices led to this moment. What would you tell our younger selves if you could go back? Mike considered the question seriously. I'd tell myself to trust the instinct to help, that kindness is never wasted, that broken people can heal each other if they're patient enough. He paused, looking out at their garden, where Emma's fairy houses nestled among Sarah's carefully tended flowers. I'd tell you that showing up covered in mud was the best thing that ever happened to all of us. I'd tell myself that falling down doesn't mean failing. Sarah added, that sometimes you have to lose your balance to find your footing. They swayed gently in the swing, listening to the night sounds of their neighborhood and marveling at how far they'd all come. Emma's laughter drifted down from her open window where she was video calling her cousins. James's soft breathing came through the baby monitor, peaceful and steady. I love our life, Sarah said simply. The ordinary, everyday, beautiful mess of it. Me too, Mike agreed. Though I have to say it's been significantly less messy since you stopped falling into mud puddles. Sarah laughed, the sound carrying across their backyard and settling into the foundation of love they'd built together. No promises. I'm still pretty clumsy. That's okay. I've gotten really good at helping people up. As they sat together under the stars, surrounded by the life they'd chosen to build, Sarah thought about the legacy they were creating. Not just in their own children, but in the example they were setting about what love could look like when it was grounded in choice rather than mere circumstance. Emma was learning that families came in many forms, that love could expand to include new people without diminishing what came before. James was growing up secure in the knowledge that he was wanted and treasured, surrounded by adults who would always choose him. And they were teaching their community that second chances were possible, that kindness mattered, that showing up for people in their messiest moments could create something beautiful. The ripple effects of their love story continued to spread outward in ways they might never fully know. The couples who'd met at their wedding and found their own happiness. The children in Sarah's reading programs who discovered that stories could change their lives. The families living in homes Mike had designed with love and attention to how people actually lived. All of it had started with one choice on a rainy evening to help a stranger instead of walking away. 2 years after that mud-covered disaster of a first date, Sarah stands in the same spot where she once fell, but now she's holding baby James while Emma practices magic tricks for passing tourists. Mike wraps his arms around his wife and son, marveling at how one moment of choosing kindness over convenience created their entire world. Sometimes the best things in life come from the messiest beginnings. Sometimes love isn't about finding someone perfect, it's about finding someone who sees you covered in mud and still holds out their hand. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that hand becomes the one you hold forever. If this story touched your heart the way it touched mine, if it reminded you that beautiful things can come from messy beginnings, that kindness still matters, and that second chances are always possible, please don't let it end here. Hit that like button to let me know this story moved you. Subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories that restore your faith in humanity, and share this with someone who needs to remember that their story isn't over yet. Sometimes the best chapters are still being written, waiting for that moment when we choose to stop to see, to help, to love. Because sometimes saving someone else is exactly how you save yourself. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.